Previously on Ex-Wives Undercover.
I think he knew my family was on his tail, that my friends were on his, it was getting intense for him. When I opened the door and I saw my aunt's face, I knew, I instantly knew something was, it was like an intervention. They were there to intervene. But I also knew, it was pretty bad. Literally, they knew they'd have to have all of their proof. So they sat me down and gave me the warrant for his arrest, the stuff on the bigamy. They said his name isn't even Sam Blair, it's John Bragg. They had printed out, they used to have that website, don'tdatehim.com, don'tdatehimgirl.com. That's Susan Bice had put him on that.
After being so cautious for so many years, because I've been divorced since 2003, so I've been by myself for 5 years. And then I thought I would trust again, and boy, look how that turned out. Of course, at the time, I didn't have a clue that anything sinister was going on yet. He thought we needed to move to a bigger place. When it got up to inspection day, he texted me and said he couldn't get off work, so he couldn't meet the inspector at the house. And then it got moved again. And then closing got moved. I was like, okay, something's starting to stink because they don't just get moved.
Welcome to Ex-Wives Undercover.
Liars, cheaters, and love cons.
I'm Amber.
And I'm Athena.
First we told our story, and now we're sharing all of your craziest and most heart-wrenching stories of love gone wrong. Sometimes we laugh.
And sometimes we cry.
But more importantly,
we stand together. All right, girl. You ready to do this?
Let's do it.
The views, information, or opinions expressed on our show by our guests are solely the views of those individuals involved, and by no means represent absolute facts. Opinions expressed by the host and guests may change at any time. Our podcast and YouTube show may at times cover sensitive topics, including but not limited to suicide, abuse, violence. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Season 5, Episode 3 of Stacey's story, John Bragg, the all-around conman. The article in the Greenfield Reporter goes on to say about Susan's ordeal with John Bragg. The real estate agent informed Bice that no matter what Bragg had told her, he had backed out of the deal weeks earlier. Bice confronted her husband, who became irate and said that she had ruined his plan to buy the house directly from the homeowner. That too proved to be a lie. Soon, everything Bice thought she knew about Bragg began to unravel. The company he told her he owned had in fact fired him in February. The Hummer was purchased with a check forged with her signature, and the wedding ring was a fake.
So I remembered the gentleman that we were buying the house from owned a car dealership. So I called him at work and said, I don't know if you remember me, but we toured your house and we signed an agreement to buy the house. And he said, yes, I remember you. I said, well, what's going on? Why does closing keep getting pushed off? Is there a problem? And he said, ma'am, I don't know what kind of man you're married to, but you're not buying my house. I had no words. The realtor drove to Hoosier Veneer the next day to get the earnest money. And I don't know what kind of language I'm allowed to use here, but he told him to F off. And then he wasn't buying the house. So he had me literally packing my house, knowing full well there was no place to go. He was insisting that I use the pods to move. And I wasn't comfortable with putting all my stuff in a pod outside, and I kind of wonder if he was planning on swiping my entire household and selling it. I contemplated that after the fact. In talking with the gentleman with owning a car dealership, and I said, well, if he lied about that, I said, he bought me a 2008 H3. I was driving a Hummer that he bought me. And he said, let me make a phone call. So he called Lockhart Hummer in Greenwood, and he said, you better take that car back because they're about to report it stolen. He had taken one of my checks and wrote it for $42,000 and change for that car, left it with them, and said, as soon as I get the invoice to my trust officer, they'll write me a check and I'll replace it with this one. And they believed him. He conned a major car dealer here in town. So when I called them and explained what happened, they were very kind. And I took the car back. And when I realized, they handed me my check back. And that was the first time I realized he had stolen my checks. So I had my dad with me, and he drove me straight to the closest, at the time it was National City Bank. And we started looking at my account, and he had emptied my bank account. It was gone. All of it was gone. So I started looking at my checkbook to see what sequence where they were at. And he had just randomly pulled them out and was just writing them. The business part of it was part of his, what I would say part of the downfall with me, because I hadn't put myself through college yet, but I knew enough about the law to be dangerous. I looked up on the Indiana Secretary of State's website to see who the principals of the company were, and it wasn't him. His name was nowhere attached to that company. So I thought, what's up with that?
Were you getting any red flags up until that point? You know?
No, his behavior was fine. I mean, he got up in the morning, he went to work, he came home at night, and there were no unusual. Now, I did find it unusual that he was getting up late at night and going to get gas. And I think what he was doing was calling home. That's why he had the prepaid cell with the burner minutes, is so he could call home.
But you didn't know about that phone.
I did not. Well, I knew he had a cell phone, but I didn't know he was putting minutes on it, because I guess.
Oh, you didn't know it was a burner phone, what that was.
No, I just thought that was his number. But He was using my credit cards to put minutes on it.
From first meeting to getting married and then discovering he was a con man, it took Susan just 28 days to put the puzzle pieces together. Let's also talk about that fake ring, shall we? Susan had some fascinating tea about how she got that beautiful ring that she learned from a police report after the fact.
There was a very pretty ring. It was later, at least according to the police officer that was investigating, he went home the morning of our wedding and stole it from his wife. It was hers.
Oh my God. Was it real?
No.
It was fake.
It was very convincing. It came in a very pretty box. It was a pretty ring. But no, it was not. He went home to get a suit and steal the ring.
Oh my God. So wait, this is really complicated. So he was married. So this is how you found out about the bigamy.
Apparently he just walked away from his life one day and didn't go back. Like, I'm going to work, and he never went back home.
But then he went back to pick up the suit and ring. Did she see him? Or he snuck in and snuck out?
Don't know. I don't know that part. That part came from the police officer that was investigating.
Oh.
I don't know that. I mean, I didn't witness it, or I didn't speak directly to her.
Right.
I've seen his wife. She was in court at his sentencing, begging for his freedom.
Determined to expose Bragg for the man he really was, Bice told her husband not to come home.
I told him everything that I knew, and that was it. He was gone. He never came back.
I know you said you talked to your dad.
He went into protective mode. I mean, what any dad would do when he realized. I mean, I tried to get a protective order to keep him out of my house because he had keys to my house, and I didn't know. Everything he had told me was a lie, and I didn't know what he was capable of. And we couldn't get a locksmith to come that day, the day we found out about the house and the car and the checks and all of that. And my dad literally slept on my couch with a shotgun.
Good boy. I like that. My dad would have done the same.
Yeah.
Don't mess with my little girl. I will take you out.
My dad did not want my boys to see the gun coming in the house. So my mom dropped him off about a block away, and he was walking. I mean, I live in a quiet subdivision, and my dad was, 6'2", 6'3", 240, and he's walking down the street with this gun. And one of my neighbors stopped him and said, I don't know where you're going, but you don't want to do this. And he's like, no, it's good. I'm just going to my daughter's house. And
oh my God.
They were kind of scared of him. But
Oh
he was just trying to make sure until we got a locksmith that he wasn't going to come in the house while I was asleep.
The article goes on to say, patrolman Tony Neumeister soon learned that Bragg was more familiar with the criminal justice system than anyone had guessed. While Bragg was on the run, Neumeister discovered outstanding warrants for his arrest out of Johnson County in Anniston, Alabama. It's probably the most involved case I've ever worked in my career as a law enforcement officer, he said. It's an eye-opener. The worst discovery, however, was yet to come. A court records search found that Bragg was married to someone other than his Greenfield wife. Bragg and Beverly Williams wed on July 19, 2002 in New Albany. The pair had since been living in Franklin, and while Williams filed for divorce in 2004, she never went through with the process. A tearful Williams told Neumeister she had lost everything on account of Bragg, who moved out in November, about 4 months before marrying Susan. Williams also revealed details that raised additional questions about Bragg's past. She believed he might have been married once before to Jody Smith of West Virginia. Police were unable to confirm whether they were divorced before Bragg married Williams. Susan met the news with calm resolve. I don't think she was too shocked, Neumeister said. Her main frame of thinking at that time was, quote, "We gotta get this guy. We can't let him do this to anybody else."
What was your mental state like?
I mean, I think a lot of it was embarrassment, angry that I believed him, that I should have. I mean, I don't like to believe the worst in people. And I never thought he would, lie about everything about him. I mean, nothing was the truth other than, at least I got his real name.
I was just going to say, I'm like, what name did he go by? Because by the time he got to Stacey, it was changed.
I was a little bit angry. So I had found that website, don'tdatehimgirl.com.
Yes.
And posted our wedding picture there. The police were involved the whole time after we found out, investigating, but they didn't know where he was until that came forward about the don'tdatehimgirl.com when that happened in Louisiana. I got a call out of the blue one day that said, we got him. I mean, I was at work and they called and said, we got him. They said, he's in Louisiana. The fugitive task force picked him up. He's conning somebody else down there. And we're going to go down and pick him up and bring him back here. And they did.
On April 14th, Hancock County prosecutors filed 5 felonies against Bragg. The warrant issued for his arrest listed charges of bigamy, theft, fraud, and 2 counts of forgery. Bragg sits in Hancock County Jail on a $50,000 cash bond. He pleaded not guilty and faced 25 years in prison and a $50,000 fine if convicted on all charges.
He had charmed his probation officer into just giving him probation and not giving him any actual time. And I'm in the courtroom watching this unfold and listening to his wife and his mother beg for his freedom because he had his little boy at home that needed his dad. The prosecutor and the probation officer were asking him all these questions and he was testifying. And he said something about, I realized that they were still married at that point. I knew that there were, so why was there child support coming out of his paycheck? So I literally wrote, he's lying, on a file folder. And I started waving it at the deputy prosecutor from the gallery. And she called a recess and took me outside and asked me what I meant. So I told her. So she put me back on the stand and asked me the questions and then put him back on the stand. And he admitted that the child support was not for a child. He was behind in alimony because he had another wife in West Virginia. And he had lied about the whole thing. And he was behind in his alimony and all this other stuff. And apparently she didn't know about the person in West Virginia. So the probation officer just kind of threw her ink pen up in the air, and the judge said, I'm assuming you're terminating your recommendation for probation. And she said yes. So they did give him the maximum sentence that they could, which was 6 years. But they gave him so much time for time served and good behavior and all of that crap that I mean, he was out way too soon. And that's why he did it again. There's no real consequence for what he did. It bothered me a lot while he was in jail because on my way home from work to and from, I passed the jail and I would see him outside the jail, like raking leaves, taking care of the property, out in the sunshine, enjoying his freedom. And I thought, you guys had to go to Louisiana to drag him back here. How do you trust him to be a trustee and be outside and not walk away? And I fought so hard with the prosecutor's office to put him like Department of Corrections, like in a real prison. And they said they couldn't do that because they didn't have jail space for nonviolent offenders. He needed to be violent in order to be properly, in my opinion, jailed here. So he got to stay in our local county jail, serve his sentence, and then they let him go.
How long do you think he was in jail total?
Not even a year. 18 months max, because I'm pretty sure they gave him 6 years, suspended most of it, and then gave him an actual term to serve. But then he got the credit for good behavior. So then they let him out even earlier.
Wow. So what were the charges and who testified during this whole thing?
They ended up, the fraud, bigamy, and theft. The theft, they wouldn't get him for the forgery of the checks because they said it was too hard to prove. He would say, oh, she's my wife. She told me to sign the check for her. Handwriting experts, things like that. It was just too much of a pain in the butt. So they got him for the theft of the checks. I had to go and testify, but most of it was the police officers and their investigation work, reading their testimony and the things that they had found out. And that's when I realized when one of the officers had told me about the ring and the suit, and that was news to me. And that, to me, it was just a slap in the face to think he'd gone home that morning to his family and I was wearing her ring.
Oh my gosh. But my question though, how is his wife, the wife in Indiana, how is she like still on his side and like testifying? Isn't she angry he left her and her son and high and dry?
Who knows what he told her?
Oh my goodness.
I can't fathom what kind of story he told her to get her to not be mad. He ran off and married somebody else. You'd think, I think she eventually divorced him. I guess, it was her husband and she loved him. That's the only thing I can think of, the reason she would stay, and she needed him out of jail for the sake of her child. Whether it was because he needed to work to help support him or, just to be there for the kid. That's why she was advocating for him not going to prison.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's interesting reading this article, and I'll ask you how you got involved in this article, but the investigator was saying you were so persistent. Where did you find that kind of strength? Because it sounds like you were just this badass, like, no, I'm not stopping until this man, because he was just like, she was like on top of it. She was checking in. She was persistent. She wasn't, backing down. Like, some people would just crumble and cry and just, I'm so devastated. How did you find that strength to just kind of put that aside and move forward?
Yeah, just pure anger. And the fact that, in my opinion, he got away with it. Yes, he has a criminal record and he lost some months of his life, but he's right back out there doing it again. So he didn't learn a lesson. It's not, and that's the point of jail, is rehabilitation, and there is none. And he's still doing it. And I can't help but wonder, all of the other victims that are out there now because Hancock County, Indiana didn't handle business.
The aftermath of being with a con man doesn't end when the relationship ends. And just like with Stacey, Susan also had to unravel everything that was in her name and the debts owed.
I ended up having to fight with the Attorney General's office to get the credit card company to remove the fraudulent charges because, Capital One, it's supposed to be zero fraud. And yeah, I even gave him the police reports, his sentencing, all of that stuff. And they still would not take those charges off. But the attorney general stepped in on my behalf with a consumer complaint and made him do it. My attorney that I had that did my annulment happened to be sitting in the gallery when John was brought in for probation violation charges. And of course they were going to set a bond. And my attorney stood up and said that he had been court ordered to pay restitution under this other case. And he would like that bond, if it's posted, to be directed to pay my restitution. Well, of course, his mommy bailed him out. So I got paid. Or I never would have seen that money.
Right.
I know that. And I never expected it. So when my attorney called me and said, "You'll never guess what I'm watching right now." So I was very thankful that he was there that day and made that motion in open court and got me my money back.
Wow. So you got it all?
Yes. The money
Wow.
that I was physically, because I had to, by the time I was arguing with Capital One over all these credit card debts and stuff, and the attorney's fees for the annulment and all of that stuff, they gave me the restitution for all of that.
So what has dating been like for Susan since then?
I did some casual dating, nobody comes around my kids. No, it's just entertainment for me. Very guarded interactions with people, not letting anybody get close because I wasn't going down that road again.
Do you feel like you do more due diligence on them? And especially now that the internet is more open, I guess, than back then, where you can snoop on social media, you can snoop on their LinkedIn and verify jobs. And do you feel like you have to do that? Or are you kind of, I don't know. In some ways, I feel like I don't want to be so jaded that I'm having to do that. But then you feel like you kind of have to be cautious a little bit too. Like, what's that fine balance between, you know what I'm saying? It's hard when you've gone through it.
Yeah. When I put myself through college and studied law and got to know the ins and outs of the system, it was much easier for me to vet people.
Oh.
So I would always check to make sure if somebody says they're divorced, I looked for it. I verified that it's there and there's a decree. There's a couple of them that said they were divorced, but they had filed for divorce, but they weren't divorced yet. And that was a hard no for me because you can just change your mind and then you're still married, because
right.
Getting divorced means you're still married until you are divorced. And so I learned to stay away from those situations. So I didn't go down that road again.
Well, Susan and Stacey were done with John Bragg, but as you can imagine, that didn't stop him from continuing to con both men and women. We've touched a little bit on his romance scams, but what about the business side of things? He seems to be a jack of all trades, as we'll soon find out. With Stacey, he worked for Dish Cable, and while he was with Susan, he was a business owner. But let's not forget, with both women, he claimed to be inheriting a big trust fund as well. In the years after he served time in Indiana for theft, fraud, and bigamy, John ventured into business once again, opening a candy store called Chocolate Gallery in 2017, and he was even featured in the Town Post newspaper in Indiana entitled Chocolate to Brag About. In the article, it appeared that John had conned his parents into forking over the money to open the store for him. The article reads, "A bought-out candy store, an empty space in a strip mall, and encouragement from their son was all it took for John and Tracy Bragg to open Chocolate Gallery in Center Grove. The Braggs were in the process of buying out Chocolate Gallery in Speedway when their son came to their house and talked about opening the store in Center Grove. The building had no paint on the walls and nothing on the floor, but they decided to open there instead of in Nashville, Indiana, where John II has 2 other businesses. Quote, we decided we'd open, and John said good because he'd already signed the contract, John Sr. said. At the time of this podcast, the business is permanently closed according to Yelp. Within a few months of that article in the Town Post, John was featured in another article in the Daily Journal, this time as a new business partner for a popcorn store owned by a 79-year-old woman and her husband. And there was a very interesting quote from her in the article. It said, although she had gotten the art of popcorn down to a science, she said the tasks that all small business owners face, such as taxes and payroll, have presented the greatest challenges. Quote, most people think, oh, you make popcorn, you must be making millions, Buck said. Well, let me tell you, I'm certainly not. It has been a struggle. We did note on their website that it says, at the end of 2018, the previous owner closed the business and a new owner purchased the equipment and hired the experienced staff to continue the popcorn tradition in Edinburgh and online with all of Carol's famous recipes intact. So if John came in as a business partner in 2017 and then the business was closed the following year, it sure seems like something must have went down. And the reason why we're making that guess is because he skipped town and went to Florida where he conned a woman there. Records show that John was convicted of organized fraud in Walton County, Florida in December 2020 and was serving 5 years of probation. Curious what his scheme was this time? John defrauded his Florida victim of more than $40,000 after telling her he was an attorney retiring due to brain cancer, according to the arrest warrant affidavit. She was selling her business, and he represented himself as Matthew Solomon, an attorney from Indiana. He said he was retiring due to brain cancer and wanted to live at the beach. He agreed to buy her business for $425,000. He only made one rental payment to her, and she received no other payments. He somehow persuaded her to give him $19,200. He told her about a trust fund he could withdraw early from, but that he needed the $19,000 for the early penalty charge. During this time, he even sent her a photo from the hospital showing him getting chemotherapy. The women of this business met both John/Matthew and his significant other at the time, Melanie. In addition, the woman also gave John money to broker deals to buy property. She also paid $12,000 for a 1969 Ford Bronco, $5,000 for a 1970s Cadillac convertible, $5,500 for an Airstream, and another $4,000 for a Ford truck. Both John, aka Matthew, and Melanie abandoned the store and rental residence. A toll notice was sent to the woman's furniture store with a Florida license plate that belonged to NJP, which stands for Not Just Popcorn Holdings, a business LLC that belonged to Melanie and John Bragg. There's definitely a pattern with both his romantic and business dealings. At this point, John and his lady love Melanie fled Florida and went back to Indiana and started a new business restoring Volkswagen Bugs called JB Bugs Trick, Truck, and Rod. Let's hear from one of the victims from that scam. Her name is Diane.
I bought my car from a friend mid-April of 2021. I had the car for 2 weeks when I took it to Davis Motorsports in Morristown. And he was going to do some engine work on it. He'd had the car for probably about a month, and he called me and told me that his engine guy was leaving. Then he told me he didn't know what I wanted him to do with my car, because with the engine guy leaving, he didn't have anybody to complete the engine work on it. I don't know if Gary approached JB or JB approached Gary, but there was some kind of a deal made where JB was going to buy Gary's shop, and he offered to take my car and complete it for the price that Gary had quoted. So I told Gary to go ahead and let him take the car. He took possession of my car around the 1st of July of 2021. From there is where things start getting really sketchy. he did take my car, and I talked to him July 4th, and I remember it because it was the holiday of 2021. And he asked me what all I wanted done with my car, because the way it was, Gary could only do like maintenance stuff. It needed floor pans. I was going to have to take it someplace else for that. And then it needed some body work. I was going to have to take it someplace else for that. JB was like, we can do it all. So he called me back, I don't know, probably about a week later. And he was like, we can do the total restoration on your car for between 12 and 15,000, but we require half down deposit. So I told him to give me a little time to come up with the deposit. I sent him $500 out of my checking account just to hold my spot, you know. And then my mom took a $10,000 check over to them. The same day that she took the check over, I got a picture from JB showing me the engine. They had gotten the engine finished. And he kept telling me we can't put your car on the books to do the body work and stuff until we get the deposit. Okay, I understand that. I kept asking, I don't know, I'd ask him maybe every 4 to 6 weeks, hey, when are you going to start on my car? Well, we've got to finish this, and then we'll put it in the books. That was always his excuse. We were going to get it in the books. We were going to get it in the books. Then the next thing I know, he posted in November, it was after Bug Jam in Florida, that he was going into business with this shop from Tennessee. Anyway, he told me around Thanksgiving time that my car was going to be going to the Chattanooga shop. I left it alone for a while. I asked him about Christmas time, hey, what's the status on my car? Oh, it's getting ready to go down to Chattanooga. It was supposed to have gone down in November. So now we're in December, 1st of January. It's getting ready to go down there. So then I messaged him again in like February of 2022. And I was like, hey, where's my car? Well, as we talked, it's in Chattanooga. Then I waited till, I don't know, 1st of March or so. And I asked him again. I was like, hey, I'm not seeing any pictures of my car. Where is my car? Oh, it's getting ready to go to Chattanooga. Yeah. So we kept flip-flopping back and forth between it was there or it was getting ready to go. If you Google searched him up to that point, he had good Google reviews. Everything went bad starting, I don't know, June or July of 2022. Because Gary called me at work. Gary and I stayed friends. We stayed in contact, even though he wasn't working on my car anymore. And he had sold his business. But he called me. I was at work and he was like, hey, you need to get on to Facebook. Shit's hitting the fan about JB. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
No. Oh, no.
So I get online and like the JB Trick, Truck, and Rod website or Facebook pages, they're gone. Like you can't see anything. So I happen to know the name of the person who had the car in Tennessee. And I messaged him on Facebook and I was like, what's going on? And I instantly get call me and he gives me his cell phone number. So I did call him and I talked to him. He said, we're not sure what's going on, but the guys at the indie shop had gone to work and they couldn't get in. Come to find out, the rent hadn't been paid on that building since like March. So the landlord went and locked the building. So the guys showed up for work and they couldn't get in.
Next time on Ex-Wives Undercover.
So I always wanted to keep up with him. I knew that he had had a couple run-ins where he had scammed businesses. I just would Google him randomly. Then random day sitting at work, I'd Google him on Facebook. I searched him on Facebook and somebody had said, bam, this guy's a con man. He's a loser. He stole all my money. And that's when my psycho ass started to get on all the VW groups. Like, I have to know what's happening. I have to know what's happening. Damage goes deep. And I know he doesn't care. I bet he'd never see or hear my name again. So always watch your back, fucker.
That's right. Got you, motherfucker.
And once again, if you like what you're hearing, please leave us a 5-star review and make sure to join our private Facebook group for even more juicy info. You can also find us on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And of course, you can always visit our site at www.exwivesundercover.com.